Okay, so let's get into the specifics of our renal corpuscle. So as we were talking about earlier, there's that afferent arteriole and the efferent arriving, exiting. This little bundle here is the glomerulus. The glomerulus isn't kind of cupped like what you see here. It actually looks more like this, which you can't see, so give me a minute. Okay, FYI, all of the figures that I'm using are straight out of your book. So if you can't see them with the PowerPoint, you can always go to your book and look at them there because that's exactly where they came from. Okay, so as I said, we've got that glomerulus, we've got the afferent arteriole, the efferent arteriole, and in this picture, Bowman's capsule looks like it's just barely kind of covering this up, right? That isn't actually how it works. If you look really closely, this is what it looks like. So that inner layer that looks like it's just covering it up actually is surrounding every single loop of this capillary bed that you see. So all of these cells here, okay, make up the visceral layer, the internal layer of Bowman's capsule, okay? They each interdigitate. Basically, their cell membranes are like this, okay? They actually are not just flat on there. They actually interdigitate like this. So you can see that here. And those interdigitations, those fingers, are actually called podocytes, okay? So podocytes, which you can see down here very clearly. So I've got this afferent arteriole coming in, and you can also see the distal convoluted tubule is very close to that. See that right there? This little bundle of cells that are around this afferent arteriole are actually the juxtaglomerular apparatus, made up of these pink cells that are the juxtaglomerular cells, right next to the glomerulus, juxtaglomerular, and the cells that make up the tube in the distal convoluted tubule called the macula densa. When we talked in lecture about the hormones that the kidneys make, we talked about renin and how it affects water balance. These are the cells that actually are responsible for secreting that. So, since this is the visceral layer, the layer of cells that's out here is the parietal layer. So remember, visceral means internal, parietal means outside. This space that you see here, when I pull out of that, the waste products out of that bundle of capillary, they go into this space. You can call this the urinary space because that's basically what you're going to eventually make out of it. So the first thing coming off of Bowman's capsule right here is that proximal convoluted tubule, the proximal convoluted tubule right there. So looking at the model, you can see the afferent arteriole coming in. Here's my glomerulus, and you can actually see these little holes here called fenestrae. Fenestrae is a very fancy way of saying window. See the little holes here? Those are the fenestrae. They're those little windows. And it's exposed over here, but I've got those podocyte cells here, okay? So I've got some uncovered, I've got some covered. This is my visceral layer. This is my parietal layer of cells out here, okay? And this space, again, is that urinary space. This would be my efferent arteriole. So I've got the afferent coming in, this would be the efferent exiting. Here's that distal convoluted tubule right next to my afferent arteriole. And at the other end, what's right after Bowman's capsule? the proximal convoluted tubules. So that's what this is. Okay, looking at the whole system, we have the kidneys, the ureters. The ureters themselves are made out of transitional epithelium. They can kind of slide the cells to make room for that fluctuation in volume. I also have a smooth muscle layer. So you've got the lumen, which is the hole. You've got the lamina propria, which is the connective tissue, the transitional epithelium layer in the inner lining. The smooth muscle, which actually does something very akin to our digestive system in the fact that you've got that peristaltic wave motion to make sure that the liquid goes from your kidney to your bladder. That actually happens so that, let's say you're laying down, I don't want to count on gravity to make sure that my urine gets down there, because if I'm laying down, nothing would move. So I do have smooth muscle that causes that kind of milking action to make sure that the urine is going from kidney to bladder. And then out here, the connective tissue layer on the outside is going to be the adventitia, okay? So these ureters, like I said, go into the bladder. The bladder entrance, like I said, is kind of back in the back, okay? I want you to notice that the ureter's entrance, that tissue right there looks very different than the rest of it out here. This area is called the trigone, okay? The trigone is less elastic than the rest of the bladder. Your bladder is also lined with transitional epithelium. Again, fluid fluctuation. It fills, it empties, it fills, it empties. So having cells that can slide on each other to kind of make more room makes sense. But that one little area, that trigone area, doesn't do that. That ensures, remember I said when it fills, it kind of kinks the ends. That fact that that little area doesn't do that ensures that when it fills, it kinks those ends. There is a limit, like I said, though, if the bladder overfills, they'll open back up. But that trigone is basically the two entrances from the ureter and the exit from the urethra, which is right here, okay? So you've got the trigone, you've got the lining, the transitional epithelial lining of the bladder. You've got the opening to the urethra, and in the urethra of females and males, you've got an external skeletal muscle sphincter that actually allows you to decide when you want to go to the bathroom. If all of a sudden I get the urge to pee, I don't want to go, oh, yeah, right? So you've got this sphincter that closes so that you decide when you're going to go, okay, and now I can urinate. So I will say this particular picture, again, is female because that's a very short urethra. Looking at the actual wall of my bladder, again, transitional epithelium. I've got that connective tissue, lamina propria, okay? I've got smooth muscle, the detrusor muscle specifically. The detrusor muscle is the one that basically squeezes your bladder and lets you know that you have to go to the bathroom. And then out here, the outermost layer is the adventitia. The kidneys are not in the abdominal cavity, they're retroperitoneal. The bladder and the ureters, well, actually the ureters are retroperitoneal. The bladder is in the pelvic cavity. It's not in the abdominal cavity. So that outer layer is not going to be a serosa. It's going to be an adventitia because of that. So looking at the model, we have the adrenal gland, the kidney, the renal pelvis, turns into the ureter. That's the bladder, right? Now, I will say this example is a male. How do I know that? Because this and this tell me that, as well as that. So I've got the bladder. I have the vas deferens there, which is part of the reproductive system. I've got the seminal vesicles here, and I've got the prostate. Only males have those, females do not. So this is definitely a male urinary system. Inside the kidney, you have the same structures that you found in the bigger model. You still have the pyramids, you still have the medulla and the cortex, you still have the capsule along the outside. I've got the minor calyces and the major calyx and the renal pelvis. I've got the renal artery and the renal vein. Again, remember, renal just means kidney. The ureter, the bladder, the adrenal gland, the kidney itself. Looking at the inside of the bladder, this would be the mucosa that is transitional epithelium inside of the bladder. There are the two entryways for my ureters and the exit for my urethra. So this is the trigon. Number 35 is the trigon. Number 37 is the opening to the urethra. 38 is the urethra. And then 39 is actually that prostate that we were talking about earlier that we saw here. Well, actually here. Okay. So looking at the slides of the urinary system. So we saw the kidney, right? But when you look at a slide of the kidney, it's actually fairly easy to see the difference between where your medulla is and where your cortex is. If we go back, notice that all of these glomeruli are in the cortex. You don't see any down here in the medulla, right? If you look at the picture, you can see all of these glomeruli. And then here, there are none. So this area out here is going to be the cortex because that's where I've got those little bundles, okay? Down here in the medulla, I don't. As well, you'll notice that some places in this medulla are really dark compared to others. These are actually called medullary rays. Excuse me. Looking at the renal corpuscle, again, you can see the little bundle. It's not like it's, hiding. You've got the glomerulus, right? You've got the parietal layer of cells, these simple squamous cells out here. You've got that urinary space. Now, hang on, I think I need to sneeze. Sorry. As one big unit, this is the renal corpuscle. The little blood vessel in the middle is the glomerulus. The capsule is Bowman's capsule. That should say Bowman's capsule, not glomerular capsule. Now, remember the macula densa, right? That kind of perfect line of cells inside of the juxtaglomerular apparatus. See that perfect line of cells right there? That's the macula densa, okay? So that should say Bowman's capsule. Looking at the ureter under the microscope. Remember, this is a tube, right? So you've got the lumen, the hole in the middle. There's the lining, the transitional epithelium. Here's that lamina propria, the connective tissue right underneath the mucosal layer. Here's the smooth muscle. And then out here, all of this gamish out here is going to be your adventitia, that connective tissue that holds it together. Your bladder, again, looking at the layers, you've got transitional epithelium, connective tissue, the muscle, the detrusor muscle, and the adventitia, that outer layer. So this is an distended urinary bladder. In other words, it's full, okay? So when they made this slide, they made sure that it was stretched out. You've got the transitional epithelium. Here's all of that lamina propria. Here's the muscle. You can see the smooth muscle in here. So that's the detrusor muscle. And this is that connective tissue on the outside, the adventitia. Taking a really, really close look, This is that epithelial layer for the mucosa, the transitional epithelium. Right here, you can kind of, well, you can see where that layered cell look kind of disappears. You can see it there really well in purple. That is going to be the basement membrane holding these cells to the connective tissue underneath. So that's the basement membrane. And then all of this connective tissue underneath, that's the lamina propria, okay? So that is the urinary system. Know the models, know the pictures. If you have any questions, you can always text me or we can hop on Life Size, no big deal.